We've been climbing this mountain of Matthew's Gospel for over 6 years, on and off, and now over 80 sermons. And we are seriously close to the top of the mountain. Where we are today is Friday morning in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is the Jewish capital city, and this is the Jewish capital on the main day of the Jewish Passover festival. Now, if you've been with us, you'll know the Passover festival was a festival celebrating the Jews' freedom from Egyptian slavery. But in the time that Matthew writes, in Jerusalem, they are currently under a Roman administration. So if you try and get your head around that, here are the Jews in their capital city celebrating freedom from Egyptian oppression whilst still living under Roman oppression. So, can you imagine some of the things that are going through a Jewish mind on this day? There's got to be some kind of heightened hope that what happened in Egypt might happen again. That we would throw off these Roman oppressors. Do you get that kind of mindset in a Jew? Which means, what is probably going on in the mindset of the Romans? They're probably raising the kind of terror threat level, worried in case there's any Jewish revolt on this festival of Freedom Day. Do you get that kind of tension? We actually know that that's what the Romans felt, because later that afternoon, whilst the Jews are celebrating, the Romans have arranged crucifixion. That's already on the plans for the day. And what better way for the Romans to discourage Jewish insurrection than the crucifixion of some insurrectionists? You can imagine the Romans speaking to the Jews going, all right, fine, celebrate how you threw off the Egyptian oppressors, but just so you know, midday, we're going to show you what happens to people who try and throw off our oppression. Capiche? There's this kind of Roman power flex to keep the Jews in place. This is an emotionally charged morning. Do you get that? There's this interplay, an atmosphere which is a cocktail of vulnerability and celebration, expectation and irritation, hope and agitation. And it's Friday morning, the Roman governor Pilate wakes up, and all this stuff, including crucifixion, is on his docket for the day. Meanwhile, the Jewish chiefs and elders have just pulled an all-nighter, busily trying to incriminate Jesus. And what we get into that mix of tension and tiredness, the Jewish chiefs bring Jesus to the Roman governor. And you're there going, this could all kick off. Do you feel it? So let's read. Verse 11 of Matthew chapter 27. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, if you remember the Jewish trial that's just happened, the question at the heart of the Jewish trial was, is he a blasphemer? The Roman governor doesn't care about that. That's not his issue. For the governor, he is wondering, is Jesus a threat to our Roman rule? He's like sizing Jesus up as a king, going, is this a rebel that I'm going to have to remove? Jesus replied, verse 11, "You have said so." That's the same reply he gave in the Jewish courtroom. Verse 12, when Jesus was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Now, the governor, Pilate, at this point in the kind of trial proceedings, would have been used to the prisoner or the accused impassioned kind of defense of why they should not be crucified. You can imagine it. You're not just singing for your supper, you're trying to escape crucifixion. And Pilate's there going, what are you going to say for yourself? And Jesus could have. We've seen in Matthew's gospel, he's already demonstrated his teaching is unparalleled in its authority. We've already seen Jesus have the ability to negotiate kind of tight questioning unbelievably. And yet here, Jesus says nothing. Verse 13. Pilate asked him, don't you hear the testimony you're bringing against you? But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Here's the first word I want us just to kind of pick up and carry for a little bit this morning. The word is silent. This episode is about to get loud. The hysteria is about to kick off. There is going to be a lot of loose words. But in amidst all that volume, Jesus shouts loudly through silence. Now, it's a scriptural silence. This is Jesus showing that he is the promised one who hundreds of years before was predicted would be oppressed and harassed, but would not open his mouth. He's the one that it was said he would be led like a sheep, silent before its slaughter. It's a scriptural silence. But it's also a submissive silence. He is not here to save himself from death. He is here to save others by dying. You can imagine Pilate trying to get his head around this. He's squaring up to Jesus, expecting it to be governor versus king, roaring lion versus roaring lion. And all he gets is roaring lion versus silent lamb. Verse 15. Now, it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they, the Romans, had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. Now, well-known there means like outstanding or particularly distinguished. So this is a lad that Pilate knows is very, very good at being bad. That's what you're getting. This guy, I think, was due to be crucified with two of his co-conspirators later that day. These were 3 Jewish rebels. And the Romans already had 3 crosses ready for them, and Barabbas's was the middle cross. And so, we read verse 17. When the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called Messiah?" Now listen to this. This is Matthew's comment. For he, Pilate, knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. So the first word we'd held was about Jesus was the word silent. Here's the second word that I want us to kind of chew on for a little bit. And it's the word self-interest. That is the Roman governor's read on the Jewish chiefs and elders. Self-interest. They're using him. They want Pilate to sentence Jesus out of all of their own self-interest. It's interesting Matthew makes this comment here. He knows, having seen it, this is about to get hysterical and the volume is about to increase, but he wants you to see underneath of everything is self-interest, envy. The chiefs are going, what Jesus has, we want. The chiefs are going, that title you used of Jesus, King of the Jews, we want it. Sin at its heart is self-interest. Behind all the evil that happens is the envy of our hearts. And I just want us to show you in this next bit, the rest of this scene stinks of self-interest. Look at what happens next, verse 19. When Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message. Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. Now you can read that and go, what a nice woman looking out for Jesus. Or you could read it as like, what a loyal wife protecting her husband. I think she stinks of self-interest. Here she goes. I have suffered a great deal today. And you can imagine someone going, all right, Mrs. Pilate. Everything about this day is about you, is it? Is that what we're saying here? Jewish Passover festival, some guys losing their lives at crucifixion. I'm so sorry, you've suffered a great deal. Let me ask you, Mrs. Pilate, where did you suffer? In a dream. Oh, Mrs. Pilate, that must have been so sore. But we laugh at her. We need to laugh at ourselves, don't we? That's us. We have this unbelievable capacity to make everything we are seeing about us, don't we? Even in the fantasies of dreamland, we stink of self-interest. It's ugly. We are ugly. Look at verse 20. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to have Jesus executed. So they've already tried to impose their self-interest on Pilate. Now who do they try and impose their self-interest on? Everybody else who's there. That's what self-interest does. It seeks to infect others for their own benefit. We do that, don't we? We try and gain influence. We try and have some measure of control. We try and dictate outcomes and so infect other people with our own self-interest. And here's the crowd sabotaging the chiefs sabotaging the crowd for their own self-interest. Look what happens, verse 21. So Pilate asked, which one of the two do you want me to release to you? Barabbas, the crowd answered. What shall I do then with Jesus, who's called Messiah? Pilate asked. They all answered, crucify him. Why? What crime has he committed? Asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, crucify him! Do you see what's happened? In this hysteria, the crowd has been infected with the envy in the chief priest's hearts. They're like puppets who are being played. The volume is coming from the crowd's mouth, but the cry is coming from the chief priest's envious hearts. What happens next is fascinating. Look at verse 24. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I'm innocent of this man's blood, he said. It is your responsibility. What's going on there? Self-interest, isn't it? Here's the guy who loyalty to the Roman law is not a sufficient impetus for him to do the right thing. Not even loyalty to his wife is a sufficient impetus for him to do the right thing. The only thing that's a sufficient impetus for Pilate to do anything is his own self-interest. And it makes him do the wrong thing. He passively condemns an innocent man to death and all the while presumes he can remain innocent. He can wash his hands all he wants, but it does not remove the guilt of his conscience. His self-interest leaves him sullied. Now, what happens next is, I know I'm saying this a lot, it's staggering. Listen to what the crowd say. He's just said, Pilate says, it's your responsibility. Verse 25. All the people answered, his blood is on us and on our children. It's shocking, isn't it? Here's Pilate hastily trying to cleanse his hands of responsibility, but the crowd are happily claiming responsibility. It's all on us, they say. Do you see what's happened? The self-interest of the chiefs has mutated into the self-condemnation of the crowd. Man, the chiefs have played this crowd so well. Infected it, polluted it, contaminated it, to the point where although it's the chiefs who have been leading the sinning, the crowd have voluntarily taken the sentencing. The chief's crime has become the people's condemnation. Do you see that? It's the chiefs who have done the dirty, but it's the people who wear the guilt. Now hold on to that, because we're going to see a contrast soon. There is a bigger application, which we're going to get to. But it is one of those kind of wake-up moments that says, you need to be very careful about mindlessly following a crowd. It happens to us all the time, doesn't it? Whether it's our community just wanting us to kind of go with the way they live, or peers at school wanting us just to do what everybody does, or advertisers just trying to entice us in, or algorithms wanting us to blindly follow wherever they take us. But when we swim in their poison, they provide no antidote for the inevitable problems. The algorithms take us somewhere, the advertisers take us somewhere, our peers take us somewhere, and when everything hits the fan, they wash their hands, and we're the ones who are left in guilt, in debt, in addiction, in depression, and at an end of ourselves. Swimming with the crowd often leaves you floating like a dead fish on the tide. And this is an episode where everyone is swimming in self-interest, but more and more people start to drown in its guilt. It's pretty tragic. Which makes what you see of Jesus next, he stunningly, strongly swims against the tide. We said already that his silence is shouting. Now what you see is that his passiveness is powerful. Look at verse 26. Then Pilate released Barabbas to them, the crowd, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. So we said, first word about Jesus, silence. The word about everyone else, self-interest. Here's another word about Jesus. Substitute. Do you see the sub? Barabbas is released. Jesus, substituted in his place, is flogged. Barabbas' name is crowbarred off the middle cross. Jesus' title is hammered in its place. Barabbas gets to go home to his family and celebrate a Passover dinner. Jesus is slaughtered as the Passover lamb. Do you see it? It's a substitution. He swims against the tide. Everyone else drowning in their own self-interest. Here's Jesus, the complete opposite. The chiefs and the elders sinned, and the people bore the guilt. What happens with Jesus? Barabbas sinned. Jesus bears his guilt. It's the complete opposite. No longer consumed by self-interest, but substituting himself in self-sacrifice. And as Matthew takes us up the mountain of his gospel, this is the peak view that he wants you to see. Jesus substituting himself for Barabbas is a sight of what Jesus has done for you and for me. On the cross, Jesus subs himself in for what my sinful self-interest deserves. He subs in and becomes my sin so that I might become his righteousness. He subs in and suffers my hell so that I might be gifted heaven. He subs in and says, it's on me, so that you can be forgiven and walk free. Silent, substitutionary Savior. And wherever we get in the Bible, whenever we get to this kind of courtroom scene, we're always going to emphasize it because it is where our lives end. All of us will stand in God's courtroom with him on the judge's seat. And in his courtroom, nothing will be swayed by hysteria. Nothing will be influenced by self-interest. It will be impeccable justice. And on that day, we will either face the justice that our self-interest deserves, or we will be freed because we have put our faith in Jesus facing what our self-interest deserved. Silent, substitutionary. Let me give you a third word for Jesus. Suffering. The next verses are harrowing. You've got to read them aware of what Barabbas would be doing at the same time. Barabbas has walked free. Barabbas is enjoying his Passover tea. And all the while, Jesus suffers. Look at verse 27. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. The whole company would have been about 600 men. Imagine the scene, like 600 roaring lions and one silent lamb. 600 men in a crowd like that, whipped up by their own self-interest to see who can do the worst, who can exceed the rest in their mockery and their torture of him. And so verse 28, they stripped him, they put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spat on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. Silent, substitutionary suffering. And you know what's amazed me this week? That's maybe not a great word. Maybe troubled me. Is that Pilate stood in that courtroom in great amazement at Jesus. And Pilate seems to be convinced by the innocence of Jesus. And Pilate seems to recognize something of who Jesus is. Every time he mentions him, he calls him King of the Jews or Christ or Messiah. But that still wasn't enough to overcome his own self-interest. And it struck me like we become a crowd here this morning. And it can be easy to kind of get caught up in the emotion of a sermon and kind of like the feelings of singing the songs together and kind of feel attracted to the community aspect of a church. But when you're here, that makes it possible to be a dead fish that's just carried along with the hype and the happiness of a church. But when Monday comes, or when temptation comes, or when persecution comes, or when the possibility of suffering comes, we end up floating in the same basin that Pilate washed his hands in. Do you get what I'm saying? We show ourselves to be a dead fish that is just floating with the tide. It's a reminder our self-interest is very strong and it's very stubborn. And it made me go, what can break me free of that? We said we're close to the mountain peak of Matthew's gospel. If you flick over to Matthew chapter 28, you actually get to the mountain peak, like the last paragraph of the gospel. And you see the disciples who up to this point have been defined by self-interest. You remember what happened when Jesus was like struck in the Garden of Gethsemane? They all fled. All of them. Do you remember what Peter did? The strongest, the kind of most self-righteous disciple. Do you remember what he said? Even if all of them fall away, I never will. What happened? 3 times out of self-interest, he says, I don't know him, I don't know him, I don't know him. What can break me out of that sinful cycle of self-interest? Look at the end of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, verse 16. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. Here's the mountaintop moment. When they saw him, they worshipped him. Do you know the only thing that can break you free of your own self-interest is if you're more interested in something else? Self-interest is actually self-worship. And the only thing possible to break self-worship is worship of someone who deserves it more. And here's previously self-interested disciples who have now not just seen and witnessed Jesus as a silent, substitutionary, suffering servant. They now see him as a risen, reigning, and returning king. And all of a sudden, rather than self-interest, they are consumed by Christ worship. And some of us are new to all this. Some of us have just started to drift from this. And it's a good reminder for us that the essence of what we are is worshippers of Jesus. And the answer to everything we struggle with is worshiping Jesus. And so for our self-interest, it is good that we're coming to this table this morning where we bring our self-interest and we crucify it with Christ and ask that he would raise us in worship of Christ. Isn't it?